Hey everybody, welcome to our Unit 2 introductory video. There you can see up here at the top of the header for Unit 2, this covers 3 chapters again, but this time it's chapters 2, 4, and 13. And do remember, as I've told you before, that I am going to be skipping around as far as the sequencing or ordering of the chapters there, so I'm just putting them together in such a way I think that makes a lot more sense, or just seem to flow together better as opposed to following them 1 through 16 in that sequential order there. So what's going to happen here in Unit 2, we're covering 3 chapters. The first of them is going to be Chapter 2, our sexual and reproductive anatomy. So primarily what this chapter is all about, frankly, it's the hardware, and no pun intended there, of sexuality. So we're going to learn a lot about anatomy, and therefore a lot of anatomical terms, some of which you may have heard before and maybe wondered about what they were, or maybe you already know them, so you'll be ahead of things here. But it's a lot of anatomical terms here. We're not going to get too carried away with that, but there's definitely some important body parts you should just know what they're called, at least formally. And the other thing you're going to learn a lot about in this chapter too is that there can be some real serious problems regarding health with some of these anatomical parts. And so we're going to be taking a look at what are called sexuality and health issues throughout the chapter. There's quite a few of them presented, which frankly I'm glad they included this information in there. So things like breast cancer and cervical cancer, for example, for men, things like testicular cancer and prostate problems like prostate cancer and enlarged prostates are some real serious issues, and none of this is definitely a joke. We can certainly kid around about some of those things once in a while, which I can't imagine why people would, but some people do that. But this is pretty serious stuff from time to time, and so we do need to address those health-related issues there. And you're going to find the chapter closes out with the idea of what is sexy. Okay, that's some pretty fun stuff there, so we'll take a look at that too to wrap up this chapter. Our next chapter in this section here is Chapter 4. Similarities and differences in our sexual responses. And so we're going to be taking a look at what actually happens from start to finish, from how we get excited or aroused or turned on, if you will, how we show signs of that sexual arousal, and what the actual consequences are, for example, ending up in orgasm and what happens after that too. And so you're going to find, however, that there's a lot of elements that feed into this. It's not just about the physicality of things. There's some ways that you think, there's ways that you feel, how you conclude certain things one way or the other, how you perceive things. There's a real, for lack of a better word here, constellation of elements that just have to come together. A lot of ingredients, if you will, that get thrown into this mix when it all comes down to how we kind of get ourselves turned on and how we get ourselves off and everything in between there. So some really interesting stuff there. We're going to walk through that in the first part of the chapter, which is pretty detailed, but it's some pretty fascinating stuff that we can all relate to because we've all been through this. So we know that, yeah, there's a lot of complicated elements that all have to kind of come together the right way for an enjoyable experience to occur there. Now we're also going to take a look here too at some important differences, because it does say similarities and differences here between females and males of our species when it comes to this sexual response that we have there. And one thing you're going to learn about right away is that when it comes to the guys, things are pretty simple and straightforward, but female sexuality, at least for most females, can be a lot more varied and complicated. There's a lot more patterns that appear to emerge, and we're going to talk about those differences and patterns too as we walk our way through the chapter there. So there's some pretty interesting things there. In fact, we're going to be taking a look at some real specific models, and a lot of those models of sexual response have what are called usually stages. And so we're going to detail all that, and there's definitely some distinct sex-based differences there when it comes to those things that women can do that men cannot, and vice versa there. So we'll examine that. And the chapter ends up kind of rounding itself out there on the issue of disabilities and sexuality, something that a lot of us don't consider. I mean, what's it like for people that have, physical and or mental disabilities there? And what is their experience like? So we'll take a look at that often neglected area of human sexuality. Our last chapter here is related here, I think, a little bit on that last note, and it's chapter 13, Sexual Problems and Therapy. So basically, we're going to be taking a look at how things don't always go off without a hitch, and how some people have chronic problems this way, which of course would not be a fun place to be in. Sex should be about fun and pleasure and enjoying oneself for the most part, and if you're not able to do those things, it actually can be a very bad, depressing type of situation there. People have some real serious problems here, and again, we can laugh about this stuff and say, oh, I lost my mojo. But it's actually a lot more serious. It wouldn't be funny if you were the one that were suffering, really having a problem, becoming aroused or having an orgasm, especially if you'd already been doing those things just fine, and now suddenly you can't. And so it can be a real distressing situation there to be in. Now, part of what you're going to learn in this chapter is a lot about diagnostics. How do we actually diagnose people, and how there's a lot of criteria, formal diagnostic criteria that physicians and therapists use to help people with these problems there. And so we're also going to be taking a look at, well, what do we do to try to help these people? So sex therapy, if you will. And there is such a thing, and there are people that are trained professionally to help people with these particular disorders or problems they're having there. We're going to take a look at some approaches and some specific techniques that are used to help in this area here. So some of these you may have heard of, and some of these may come as quite a surprise to you. And let's take a look at one more thing here too that's important to mention here as well, and that's the issue of when does it become a situation where there's just too much sex. So how much is too much? We're going to take a look at the phenomenon that's, at least for now, usually dubbed hypersexuality. Some really interesting stuff there. And not without controversy diagnostically, too, you're going to learn in the lecture there as well. And the last element there in the chapter is all about how we talk to our partner or partners about sex. So if you thought it was difficult to talk to your kids, if you got kids, about sex, wait till you try to do that with your partner. That can be a lot more difficult and challenging, if not downright terrifying sometimes too. It can really be difficult there, but your book authors provided an addendum there at the end of the chapter, which I definitely want you to take a look at for the exam there. So you'll see some real helpful things there if you're having some concerns. Think of them as do's and don'ts when it comes to talking to your partner about sex. And you'll see there's a similar sort of addendum there, which you already saw there back in chapter 10, our lifespan chapter, talking with your kids about sex. And so it's got some really great advice. There's some tried and true tips, and again, do's and don'ts. Okay, well, that's all for the introduction to the unit here. So I will see you in the chapter lectures.